Yeah, that's the best it gets too. Yep.
Oh my God. That'd be really cool. That's enough. It's telling me I did. Huh?
We don't have to do that.
Yeah, it's just an update on secondary plat approvals.
We weren't seeing any of that.
I know I turned all the mics off. I thought it was that. Jeff turned his off and it stops.
And sometimes if I get to just off the microphones, it'll start. And then got me.
Went into, or turn it off and turn it back on.
All right, there you go. 7. Otherwise call to order the October 5th, 2022 Pendleton Planning. I'll do a roll call starting on my left.
Connie Schultz.
Brad Valentine, Kyle Eichhorn.
Cheryl and Hunt. Jenny Sissom, Carol Nina.
All right, we have a forum on your drive of the minutes from the August.
Second.
All right, motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, carries. On with no old business. Go on to new business.
Alrighty. So we're getting pretty good at this. So on the G drive, you'll see the usual Excel spreadsheet of proposed amendments. The first one is kind of the most in-depth. It's the accessory wind synopsis. So that has its own synopsis in the G Drive folder if you want to follow along, but I'll let Denise explain that to you. We haven't really had like any inquiries about solar, or not solar, wind accessory structures at all. We don't allow commercial wind at all. So we are just kind of looking to do kind of the same thing that we did with solar and just strengthen our accessory wind standards, because they're pretty not in depth. They're not very clear at this point, and very basic. So just to make sure we have something in place to address those concerns should they come up. But I know I haven't received any inquiries. I don't think Denise. No, nothing. No calls, no nothing. It's the only thing we've got inquiries about is accessory solar, which is a little bit more common and probably easier to get your hands on. So, all right, if you want to take it away, your suggestions, they're on the last page of that synopsis.
Yeah, and the one that I printed out in front of you, I think it's also on the G Drive. That's laid out a little bit better, enlarge the print there too, so you can take a look at that as we go through. But yeah, the wind energy synopsis, it's not, it's a little bit more brief than the solar. There's not as much seems to be information out there. A lot of the towns are really keeping it pretty simple approach to it. They have not seemed to gravitate as far as being very welcoming, but yet there's a trend. There are some of the larger cities that are starting to take a hold of it and looking into becoming that energy ready city. So there are some of the cities like Fishers particularly that they're doing a little bit more research. But as far as just in front of you, did get with Chris Nodine. He basically said he had the same concerns for the wind as he would for solar. He would just want to make sure that it was clear enough to where it did not prevent any safety concerns, that equipment, the mechanical equipment, is somewhere in the peaks or the edges of the perimeter of the roof. So he said those are the same. As far as speaking with Craig Switzer, he is our electric supervisor, and he said the same thing as far as that interconnection application. We want to make sure that that is done as well. We have moved away from the net metering ordinance, which is something that state has kind of moved to where that is no longer required. So what we do for anyone who does want to do net metering, they work directly with IMPA. So they would not work with the town of Pendleton for a credit on their utility bill. They're just going to get reimbursed for the overage that they acquire each day. So that's something that will be taken outside of the town of Pendleton, but Craig would help coordinate that when it comes to having that system connected to the grid. But he did say that he would definitely still inspect and make sure that it did flip off when it needs to be turned off. So as far as state movement, really have not had any case law for wind accessory use. There is a Senate and a House bill out there that is in effect. And what that does is it encourages energy ready cities. But what they do is it's just a statement that if you adopt these default standards, then we will claim you as an energy ready city. I'm assuming that that probably helps out with certain grants and different programs that are available to those cities, but that is just for commercial farms. So we have already adopted the change in the UDO to not permit commercial wind farms or solar farms. So we already have that taken care of. The next page, I won't go into detail, but if you want to look through, there is evidence in the last 10 years as far as movement towards different nonprofit groups and organizations that are working hard with legislation to be able to get some energy renewal programs across the state. So that's what's on page 2. And then the bottom of page 2, Actually, I kind of put this out of order because the top of page 3, I just wanted to provide some details just to get an idea of what accessory use for wind systems, what that looks like. But the bottom of page 2 is just the definitions that we already have in place that specifies between the difference of commercial wind farms and accessory use, and then just what a wind energy system is, in general. No, accessory use is just for the benefit of that property owner, where then commercial is just where they then produce energy and then sell it, make it for a profit though. But as far as from what I've gathered for wind energy systems that are accessory in nature, anywhere from 5 to 15 kilowatts of energy savings are produced if you have a 10,000 plus kilowatt hours per year system. That for a 10 kilowatt system, it usually costs, they say it can be up to about 50 to 80,000. I think that's probably why we don't see them very often. It's very excessive and it takes a long time to be able to recoup that initial upfront cost. For a smaller unit, and those from what I've seen is more for roof mounted, they may only extend 5-6 feet on top of a roof to be able to give that height advantage, but yet it's not as beefy, as a system. And that's 3,000 to 8,000 is what they say that costs to install. But the benefits as far as cost savings is very minimal. They find that usually you want about 30 to 60 feet in height for a wind turbine to really produce that ideal savings. But a lot have been able to meet that average use with an 18-foot ground mounted turbine. So I think that's kind of where a lot of the cities have hit that as a threshold to keep it 18 feet and below. And so they varied a little bit, but then also too, you get a lot of homes that don't get that surrounding circumference of a clearance. And really it takes quite a bit of feet to be able to operate effectively and efficiently, to be able to generate those savings. So I think that has kind of been the reason why Hannah and I have not received any inquiries or questions about this for the town of Pendleton, but it doesn't mean that it's not coming, and we want to be ready and make sure that we have some of the same provisions that we've done. So in the solar, we want to also be able to incorporate that in the UDO for our wind. The next section, it hits where we do allow wind accessory use. Again, we don't allow any commercial use in any of our zoning districts, but permitted we allow in Ag 1, Ag 2, and rural residential. Conditional use, we do not even have that in any of our districts for accessory use. So tonight, we can discuss and entertain or, consider broadening that, allowing all zoning districts to be either permitted or conditional use for accessory wind. A lot of the towns seem to be going that way to show some flexibility and to allow individuals to benefit themselves. But then some of them have limited and kept it to ag. So we'll kind of go over that here in a minute as far as some of the areas that I was able to find some information on. The next section, I just put this here for our accessory use height limitations that we have currently in each of the zones. So the left column, you have the zoning district, and then on the right, it shows what that max height is. So it kind of gives you an idea if we allow to the max height in, say, the ag, then we're allowing 30 feet for a ground mounted wind turbine. For non-residential, if we went with what is established in the zoning district in chapter 2 of our UDO, then we would be allowing up to 50 feet. So those are just some things to kind of consider as we go along. But then the next end of page 3 and page 4 are what we outline. What are the things that we probably want to make sure that we do eliminate if you so find that it is appropriate, is the anemometer. That is a tower that is used to calculate the wind, measuring the speed of wind. We have it in there that it's 100 feet or less. So that might be something that we may want to just remove altogether, or at least maybe limit it to 18 feet. I don't know how efficient an 18-foot measuring system of speed, but being that we're not allowing commercial farms, I don't really know if that's even necessary, for a residential use or a business use for their own personal benefit. We do have, as far as the lot standards on the setbacks, the way that it is written is that from the ground to the very peak, most vertical, that total height is what minimum distance it has to be from a property line. So from the most vertical blade, if you were to lay it down, it has to be that distance from a property line. So we do have that in place. We can strengthen that, we can increase that, because I know a lot of our side and rear setbacks are only 5 and 10 feet. We can, and then at minimum, it at least has to be 10 feet from a property line. So I feel that we're pretty good there. Also, as far as operations, kind of goes into that, the microwave, electronic, all the receptions and so forth with TV and so forth. If we were to find that it was to create an interference that is more than minimal and acceptable, it would not be allowed. And then we've got some safety precautions as far as the system itself. And then also sound pressure. It does have that 55 dBA, which is good. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I never caught that in our UDO, but if it is in a storm, then it could be allowed to be a little bit greater if it was in use, at that time. But anyway, I feel like those standards are there, but we've kind of missed as far as a maximum kilowatt, our lighting, our glare, our roof stability, those type of things that I think that we could benefit by improving those. And then on procedures, pretty good there. Our building inspector, we did this for solar. He would ask that we did the same for our wind, that he does not have a permit application for that wind. They will go through that interconnection. They'll go through the electric department to be able to get that set up. However, as far as a building permit, we will continue, if you're okay with that, not to require that. However, we would like to add a phrase in there that they are subject to inspection at any time. We did that for the solar. So we'd like to add that phrase into our procedures there. And, oh, go ahead. I think it's just because he feels that that's kind of out of their element. It's kind of, they're more for the structure of a building, more so than a mechanical equipment. That's kind of what I've gathered, but. And be Craig. Yes, Craig will take care of that for us.
So he has an application. It's the interconnected application.
There, yeah, it's 150 for the application. They also have to provide him proof of insurance for that. I think it's $1 million, $2 million on that. And it does bring, and there's an agreement that they have to sign. Yes.
And all of the building specifications, roof stability, everything would be checked by them.
And we will work with them when that comes, because I think, we've not come to this. So, but I would anticipate that we would have that as a checkpoint. We would probably go with him as a learning experience as well and make sure that those setbacks are met, that it's properly mounted, So yeah, I think that we'll have to have our eyes on that too.
Yeah, and you probably want to do a plan that shows the dimension.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
something that probably is in Craig's packet, so we can make sure that maybe on that application it says check by. But the few we have, he's always. And I know busier. Town, and so making sure we set it up for now, even though we aren't still. Right. We want to think about it. And then if there is an uptick, we are going up. So.
Yeah.
It's still a goal. I mean, we could always have it as like a regular permit application, and we just review it, but there's no fee associated with it.
Yeah.
Staff's coming on,
Reviewing.
reviewing.
Yeah, that's right. And even if it's, so something to, yeah, make them serious about what they're bringing to you, so you're not going back and forth saying, you need this, you need this, you need this, you know, these things.
Yeah.
So it's still they earn money. Looking money down to the past.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And we could probably even do accessory use. I wonder if we could kind of have that in on the accessory if we, you know.
We already have a fee for that.
Mhm.
That's not-
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Anytime he receives that, we can just take it over and we work together on our permits even too now. So that'd be very simple, I think. Yeah. Keep that. As far as towns, Westfield and Whitestown, they allow it in their ag properties. They kind of limit it to that and special exception. It's kind of like our conditional use. It's just a higher level of scrutiny. And I think it's Westfield, yes, that they have a technical review committee that reviews this in-house. Whitestown, not quite for sure if they go through a special committee or if it's just held within the planning department or if it goes in front of their planning commission or BZA, sorry. But yeah, they do have the certain limits there, but they keep it just to those type of zoning districts. Carmel and Fishers, they allow it in all districts. However, a little bit different. Carmel, they treat it as an accessory use. And they limit the height to 18 feet. And so they said they don't have any. They find that it's doesn't benefit them, you know, to incur those costs with minimal savings. So they said that it's rarely even seen in Carmel. Fishers, it seems like their movement that they're really trying to be more open to the idea. They put in some extra requirements for single family districts, for buffering and screening and so forth, and those kind of requirements. But they treat it as a mechanical equipment versus an accessory use. So there's a little bit different approach to it at this time. I would anticipate probably in the next 5 years, just talking with their staff, just communicating through email, that's probably going to change. I think that they're kind of working on some things, but they all seem to be, consistent as far as, not allowing the commercial use at this time and keeping it, just for beneficial use.
Doesn't seem like this screen would be- Screen.
Yeah, yes, and I don't, yes, that's kind of what their little details that they gave, and I was, yes, that's the same.
We'll say 18 feet max. So why don't you just say, I mean, you're better off-
You just build a hill. and put those on.
Yeah, or put it in the valley to where it's not seen, yeah. Mhm.
It's a way of presenting it. Make it look like we have it, and people-
Yes.
I think
Mhm.
pretty straightforward, but, you know,
Mhm. Yeah,
so I can't imagine how that's screened.
yeah, It'd be even practical. And I know in our solar, we did do like the 6 foot max on a ground, and we did have where it needed to be screened by a fence. I think it works for that, but I think wind's a lot different. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So,
And I think it's important to, especially when you straightforward with the,
yeah.
that way, and it feels
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't straightforward as
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah. That was a very interesting article. And basically the town lost because they didn't correctly approve the solar farm. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. But these are just some recommendations that we talked about. If you want to keep just to the ag property zoning districts and the rural residential, we can do that. Keep it as permitted, or we can move those to conditional, or we can move to all zoning districts as conditional use. And then that way they do have to have that site plan when they do file their petition with BZA. And, we'll present it each time and make sure that, all the Ts are crossed and the Is are dotted. That, kind of makes us feel a little bit more comfortable, making those decisions, that we have a backing of the board. So we like the idea of that conditional use. But yet, that's ultimately your decision, on, what you feel is appropriate. And then we just kind of broke down here as far as roof and wall mounted and ground mounted units. Definitely don't want the height to exceed any of the accessory use limits. But, and then that provision that the fire chief has asked for as far as pathway of accessibility. I want to have that in there as coverage. And then also the other that we've proposed is maybe not being on the front wall or a side street wall. Give a little bit more hidden view, being on the back side. But and then as far as a ground mounted, we can go with 18 feet across the board. Gives them a unit that is somewhat efficient, that generates some savings for them. But, or if there is a accessory use that is less, like some of them are 15, then they'd be limited to whatever is the least amount. And then as far as our operating standards, these are all repeat from the solar. The same exact wording from that for each one of those. And would also require that roof stability for a roof mounted system. We definitely want to have that report on file. And then procedures, these are also the same that are outlined in the solar. The first one is just an addition that for some reason it just didn't get added to the wind on that first line. So, I don't know if you guys want to discuss, or if you have any questions for me, or.
So do we want, but we can adopt these things here and then also discuss if we want to change which zoning district. I think it makes sense to, it's a low volume item at this point. If it ever becomes increasingly burdensome for the BPA, we can always make it permanent. Certain, I think for now, to make it additional.
But are we going to do?
Conditional across the board.
I can't see where some of these. Needs to be at least 18 feet on. I don't see where.
The setback is the height, right? So,
Yeah, but this is saying to be efficient.
Oh.
It needs to be, right up. It can't only just be.
Yeah, there's not a lot of places this would actually be practical except in ag and rural res. I mean, there are some SF1 lots we have that are pretty
Unless the
large.
Technology changes. to the point
Right,
where
right.
they
So
don't know how to capture
do we have in here like that the height of the turbine would cap at the accessory accessory height?
Not currently.
That's one of the proposed
Okay.
changes is cannot exceed maximum.
Yeah, and I think that's especially for ag places, that's appropriate because we allow higher accessory structures just because it's ag. So I think allowing that is a really good
Well,
move.
Equally, they would be that much farther.
They
from the
would,
property line
yes.
if the lots are large.
Right, so if you have a 30-foot tall wind turbine, then it has to be 30 feet at minimum from each property line, so you'd have to have a pretty big parcel to do something like that, so.
Additional-
just keep it at that.
and not allowed in other districts. I mean, I guess if it's not permitted, somebody could.
They could
is
seek
there
a
way
land
to
use
apply for a
variance,
variance?
yes. But those are very, very rarely allotted, they're just not
The finding
practical.
They would have to make would be impossible.
Yeah.
If you ban it, or if you don't allow it, it's not gonna happen.
I'm hearing from, just because technology changes so quickly, and the fact that if we go the other way, and even though it's approve and approve, and then decide we don't like the deal with this, and become more restrictive, I think that makes it harder for cases. Yeah, inconsistent.
So it would, do you suggest then just conditional uses in the 3 zones it's permitted in right now?
Just
Or
move those to conditional.
just move those to conditional? Okay,
And then as technology, as we have people come in and actually do it, then we can. I would
Yeah.
rather Do that, it's always harder. to learn, you know, because someone then would have a case,
right.
right?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. It is.
Mhm.
Because it's something we haven't dealt with.
We need a motion. That's the plan. Conditional and active.
Mhm.
I will make the motion to make accessory wind use available in Act 1. Rural residential.
Mhm.
as conditional.
Having conditional use.
Favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
So do you want to approve these or the upgrades as a whole or in sections?
We can
Or
discuss them if we're all
Yeah.
agreeable to them as a whole. It's adopt them as a change it.
Okay,
Move on to that part. So
Okay.
The last page of the PDF has proposed, I guess it's also. this guy.
yeah, it's the one with the blue
So if there's
stripe at the
any
top.
Discussion there, if you like all of them. then-
Right.
Were we going to?
But it says add to permits.
Yes,
So
Yep.
It's gonna be like a subcategory of building permits.
yeah, we can do that, or we can have it as like a subcategory of Craig's permit and just charge more. for it. Yeah, for the additional
So I
time.
think we're covered there. Let's say add.
So the max height of 18 feet for all zoning districts or maximum height of accessory structure, whichever is less. So
Was it-
that would be 18 feet in like rural res and, right, so we probably want to. So like if it's ag 1, that would have to be 18 feet. Okay, I don't think we want that. I think we want it to
We just
be,
wanna say maximum height of accessory.
yeah,
That's what we'll
Yeah.
strike the maximum.
Yeah. Yep. So max height is the accessory structure height. Cool. Okay, so I guess I skipped forward, sorry. Anything with roof wall mounted, any concerns on those additional points Denise wants to add? Okay, so ground mounted. We fixed item 3 there. Let's see, wind accessory shall conform to the side and rear setbacks. Or a distance from every property line. Okay, so we want to probably strike the first part of number 2, because we want it to be, or is that like one of those, whichever is more?
Whichever is greater.
Yeah.
covers, So if there's a larger setback required,
Yes, okay,
that way you can have a short.
Right. Okay, so use and operational standards. Those are pretty, I think you said you took those from the solar, so glare, lighting, all of that. All right. Procedures, we talked about adding permits, anything else with that? And we do have in there about anything about decommissioning. I don't know if we need that for
We do for the solar
an accessory or commercial,
in.
because I know we have,
That was in the commercial.
okay, all
Yes.
right, I just want to make sure we aren't leaving anything out with that.
Not for accessory.
It's somewhat covered under nuisance.
Mhm.
Yes,
In the
you
event that
can.
it's abandoned and unsafe.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like the only change we made was to ground mount to the
mhm,
adopt the proposed changes with that.
I'll make the motion. With the modifications added.
Okay. All right. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? All right.
all right. So now we're on to the other amendments, if you want to go back to that Excel sheet in Google. The next thing we have on the list is our maintenance bond holds. As far as I'm aware, these are usually 3-year holds, and our UDO has them listed as 2 years. So I thought that should probably be updated because that's what we've been doing consistently with any maintenance bonds that we do have. So I suggested 3 years instead of 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll move through these. Yay or nay, and when we get to the bottom, we'll just vote on.
Excellent. Our construction and development process, I would like to add language about a bond determination letter that the town will give the developer so that we have on record how much both performance and maintenance bonds have to be. And this is on letterhead that's saying we require bonds for these things at this amount or percentage. It's typically 110% for performance and less for maintenance. And then I sign it and everybody gets a copy. So good, okay. We are missing some language that outlines processes for how construction can happen. So we have 2 ways we allow major subdivisions to construct. They can either put in the infrastructure and then record their plat, or they can post bonds and then record the plat immediately. So they don't have to go through putting in all of the infrastructure. So we only have language that speaks to option 1, but probably just help people to have it explained as option 2 instead of just in the flow chart. So I have some language that I can add already because I've had Kyle Smith's subdivision and he was really confused on our processes because they weren't clearly outlined in the UDO. So I would like to add that. Landscaping maintenance bonds, we have it. I'm not sure why we have a percentage listed. So this amendment is kind of twofold. It says that our maintenance bond is 110% of the total cost, which is typically a performance bond. So that might have just been a typo. So the maintenance bond should really only be 10 to 25% of the performance. So the language should be changed to the developer shall post a maintenance bond for landscaping and the amount is determined by the town. Because we can do more if we so choose.
Why don't we just specify 25%?
I think we should leave it open to be determined by the town, because I've only seen 10% on anything, but it can typically, or not typically, but sometimes it can go up more than that.
And that is because of a longer term.
Yeah. I know that, yes, and we've been kind of in the past not had the best bonding system where we've gotten a little screwed. So I think having it as determined by the town, we can make it 25% if we want to, but I don't think all developments should have 25% maintenance bonds. I don't think it's necessary.
It is, yes.
How long is the maintenance bond held?
3 years. Well, now it's 3 years. Right, and we have a, we require a certified opinion of cost from an engineer for any bonds that a developer pulls. And our engineer will typically look over it as well to make sure that it is appropriate. And they do adjust for inflation. Okay, so are we good with adding that language? Okay. All right. Another thing I noticed in the signage, I know I bombarded you with signage updates last time, but there's no time limit for temporary signage in residential. We have 14 to 30 days for anything that's not residential signage. There's not a whole lot you can do in temporary residential, but I wanted to approach the board about, should we have a time limit on what kind of, in residential zones, having a temporary sign?
So they don't require it.
That either, yeah,
There's no way to track.
yeah, maybe we should
But they
change that
put
too.
out there.
I think it's mostly just like when Brett drives around, he's like, oh, I've seen that for a while. So,
And when that opens,
I mean, what's the,
what's defined as?
It's-
Basketball.
Yeah. And
basketball team,
the way this
and
is
it's in my
written,
yard.
it says that the temporary signs allowed in residential zones are monument, post, and swing signs. And to me, those are permanent. So I'm really not sure. So I can go back and like look at this and maybe come back with a more defined amendment. But I kind of just, if I were to be writing this to maybe mimic the non-residential zones, do you think there should be a permit with a time limit on it, same as anywhere
I mean,
else?
there should be an exemption for school.
Yeah, yeah, and like
On
our temp,
personal Property.
yeah,
So give me an example.
Yeah, I'm
Real
thinking,
estate for sale sign,
that could be one.
add a new post and swing.
Yeah, that would be a swing sign, like a for sale.
Realtor.
that falls under the code.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I think
that's
we
swing.
don't require a permit.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
So.
so,
But nobody's gonna
and we've
say
had
a
no issues,
temporary
but it's
monument
just,
sign, that sounds-
I know, I'm not really sure.
Maybe we should maybe- when we look at-
Yeah, I'll take a look at that, but it's something I wanted to bring to your attention, that it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense as it sits right now.
Now my curiosity is piqued. I'm gonna have to go for a walk.
It's on page 100, so if you need to look at it and see if you can find one, please let me know.
In my head before.
I don't really
Yeah,
know.
there's an auction sign on that.
It would be considered like a room.
Yeah, I think maybe for this item, we will not make any changes. tonight.
Yes,
Do
okay.
further research.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But while you're doing research, I did not find it. I could see on me, and I don't remember any discussion. Vacated. So when a business is no longer there, but
Mhm.
the sign remains,
Mhm.
which on. When they vacate, they should take their business.
As far as I'm aware, I'm not sure we have anything about vacated signs. Now, if it falls into nuisance or disrepair, that's where we could, go after the landlord to remove it. But as it sits, I don't believe we have anything that speaks to that. Now, there might be other ordinances that I'm not aware of, maybe within the nuisance or unsightly that speaks to that. But as far as I know, it's not. So do you want me to look into that?
Yeah, I would, and
Okay.
because we have one that's. called- In fact, the property. Using it as a residential now, but it used to be a business, but the business sign is still up.
Okay.
It's just a coffee shop. But it's really holding themselves out as something they're not.
Mhm.
They understand.
Yeah, I can take a look into that.
Yeah,
And
we're gonna make a proposed change to the other side.
And just as we grow and our footprint grows.
for sure, we'll take a look into it. Take a look. All right, next one I've got, more signage, sorry. Monument signs in our down. Huh? Oh, did I not take that out of there? No, I took it out of the G
Okay.
drive because we're updating that peddler's permit with Mark. So we don't need to do anything with it. Monument signage in our downtown business district, as it sits, we allow 4x4 signage. It's not very much, especially for multi-tenant buildings. So I circulated some ideas, and the sheet that I circulated to our HPC is in the G drive. And they agree that for multi-tenant buildings, 16 square feet is just not really enough room to display and get visibility on all of your businesses. So going off of our commercial districts, which their monument signage is 48 square feet with an 8-foot max, I kind of brought that down to a pedestrian level. And I'm suggesting a 40-foot square foot max with a 5-foot height max. If you look at the bank right here across the corner, or the depot shoppies, I mean, those are all much bigger than 16 square feet. One of them's taller than me. So kind of keeping it at the pedestrian level, but allowing more visibility for multi-tenant buildings. They suggested as well to keep the 16 square foot for single tenant, but allow up to 40 for multi-tenant buildings.
And those are approved with the site.
The sign permits are separate from the site plan. It's a separate permit payment.
But it's reviewed.
It's reviewed by staff, and if we don't feel comfortable issuing it, we take it to HPC. But we do have to issue a COA before any signage is allowed. And there's not a whole lot of places where this is possible anyways, but the places that do have it right now or want to have it are all multi-tenant buildings. So they need a little more wiggle room than 16 square feet.
5 foot and 40 square feet for multi.
Yeah. Any concerns on that? Okay. All right. Next thing we have is hobby farms, and then we have a category called beekeeping and chickens. So bear with me. Hobby farms are only allowed in certain districts, and they have a certain number of animals that you are allowed to have per table. I don't know which one. So the max we have on chickens is 10 chickens, right? So, but there are zones that allow the category of beekeeping and chickens, which is not considered a hobby farm. in places that do not allow hobby farms. So these are typically more residential areas that wouldn't have the space for what we call a hobby farm.
They can have more chickens.
That's where we're getting to. You beat me to it. So I'm wondering if we should keep for the chickens beekeeping, should we follow the 10 animal max, which is what it is on the hobby farm for,
Is that per acre or is that?
I can't recall off the top of my head. I think it is a per acre thing.
If you do 10 per acre on somebody who's beekeeping chickens on a lot.
Mhm. I'd have to check the UDO. Yeah, if you want to. Well, that's the other thing. Like, I know how to count chickens, but I don't know what we should do for bees. Like, if you can have 3 hives, number of hives. I think there's typically 1 queen in a hive. Yeah, yeah. If you check that table, it's in, I should know the page. I think it's a per a section of an acre. I'm not really sure. But it is 10 animals. So I think we need to clarify that not only in like our zoning in chapter 2 to clarify what that means, but also in the definition section and say if it's supposed to follow the hobby farm table, if it follows a different table, I can construct that where it's just 5 chickens only and 2 beehives or something like that.
There's a problem.
That's not my say, but just on average, how many?
I would say on a non-hobby farm, if you live
That's kind of what I was thinking, because I know there's a resident in town that we actually had a bit of an incident with. He has 5 hives, but we don't really have any language that states that if it becomes a nuisance or unsightly or the odor, that's only referenced for hobby farms, not this. So we need to put that in there as well. So we can be like, hey, this is being a nuisance or something of that nature, the odor.
probably apply to chickens.
Yes.
So yeah, the table is 4.1 and it does say it's just a half.
What's it say for chickens and poultry?
10.
It's just 10, not per acre, not anything. It's just,
So that's where we could apply that table to
yeah,
the chicken beekeeping.
right. Yeah, I can add a section to it. So for the chicken beekeeping category, how many chickens should we allow on these places? And like I said, they're typically more of the larger residential zones that we have, SF1, SF2, maybe rural res. It should probably be less than a hobby farm, if I had to suggest.
10 chickens, that many. I mean, 10 chickens per hobby.
I mean, to me, that's an uproarious amount of chickens, but
Where is the beekeeping chickens?
it does, as an accessory use.
It's in this table on page 240 as permitted up to SM2, but it doesn't say what it.
I don't know if there's a definition for it. I think there is for beekeeping. It's like the keeping of bees for honey and pollen and stuff. But maybe those are just categories that are meant to be less intense than something like a hobby farm. So I think they should have less intense amounts that you're allowed to have.
So I'm not sure something.
Me either.
What's next door? Deathly allergic.
I think that becomes a civil issue.
Is that?
Yeah, yeah,
It's just never been something honestly I haven't really.
yeah. Now, if they start swarming and they become what did I have here?
Negligent in the keeping.
Yeah,
Well, and I would think, I don't know much about. Probably need some open space. Expect them
Yeah,
to work.
yeah. And I think it's only permitted in, what is it, SF1, SF2 and rural res? Is that what the table said?
Up to SF2.
Up through SF2. Okay, yeah.
It's not defined anywhere. Chickens and beekeeping are not.
Not even beekeeping? Then we need a definition.
So we're not quite ready on this scale.
I think we
Mhm.
need to do some research on how many hives is.
Mhm.
And I
And we can
Chickens
put
are
that
reasonable.
in
Do
the
we have a no rooster
definition.
Policy, is that in here?
I think we do. I'm pretty sure we have a.
I think we nixed that. Uh-huh.
I mean, you could. get out
No,
of it.
we have
Yeah, the
no
word
rooster.
rooster doesn't appear in the.
No.
I thought we had no rooster and.
I had suggested that, but that amendment didn't pass.
I thought,
Anywho,
I thought it that for cows, because we don't want to be.
Well, I think if we define chicken keeping as the keeping of hens, we can allocate that
Yeah.
to the residential area.
and we can
And
put,
we put in there that doesn't apply to hobby farm.
Yeah.
Chicken.
Yeah.
And then beekeeping, we can define and set a maximum number of times.
yep. And we can do that all in the definition section. So that when it references it, it says, this is what beekeeping means, and this is how many hives you get, and this is what chickens means, the keeping of chickens. And this is how many you can have hens. So,
Yeah, I guess we just need to determine what a reasonable number of each.
Yeah. I think 5 and 5, I would put that out there as reasonable, but
Violates within.
Probably less than 10 for sure. I mean, you basically get a little less than an egg a day in peak. Even a half dozen would probably be. Hens only.
mhm.
Keep it 10. With the hobby now.
Yeah, I guess that would make it consistent.
But we could define it as hens only.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
For family of 4 and even about 4.
But I mean, one of the eggs are actually today.
We're not a producer.
Alright, so
This
item,
one.
We're gonna be. consistent.
Yes,
Do some
yes.
research.
We will do that. Next, we've got subdivision waivers. This section states developers can apply for a waiver in both our primary and secondary plat phases, but planning commission no longer sees secondary plats, and I can't approve waivers unless it's something really, really, really reasonable. Like I can't put a tree here because there's a hill, move it to the side. I can approve that. So I would like to update the language to only have waivers available in primary platting phase. That way they go through a board. But as it stands, if the planning department and the developer can agree on something that the department is asking them to change in their secondary plat, to bring it up to code or, something like that, they can request to go before planning commission, and you will vote on their primary or on their secondary plat, and you can issue a waiver in that scenario. But you are limited on what you can, either in primary or secondary. Allow waivers on, it's only chapters 5 and 6. Anything else, for the most part, they have to go to BZA. So I would like to update that language.
So, I mean, as long as there's a way, once primary plat's approved, the secondary is gonna be years down the road where we not have to go back necessarily.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to go back.
Yes.
Yes. And it might just be something, like in the off chance that they find something in a survey and they're like, we just really cannot do this and I can't give them permission to do it. They need to come before the board to ask for that waiver. But with what you're limited to in chapter 5 and 6, That's subdivision design and subdivision types. If they don't know that in primary, that's not really best practice. So anything else that typically comes up is something that would go before BZA. But it could happen. So, all right. We need additional text. There are some drainage covenants that are on page 157. I would just like to add that the town also has to approve of any drainage covenants. Right now, it says only the county drainage board, which we've taken over some ditches and drains. So it doesn't even go through that body anymore. So it does need to be approved by the town, our drainage engineer.
County granted and still county regulated drainage.
Yes, yes. I think this, I would have to look back over it, but yes, we can do and or.
County drainage board, if it has, I'll make this more artful, but if it has jurisdiction, otherwise the town.
Okay. Okay, so I will add that language. All right, and then last two, so the drainage covenants that are listed on page 157, section 3, I want to add those to the required plat languages for primary and secondary plats. That appendix B that we went through that has the surveyor's certificate, deed of dedication, all of that. And then the next amendment there is basically just more of that, but it's for the auditor and the recorder to put their signatures on there as well. And the words prepared by, because apparently those are important. So,
The auditor and recorder only applies to the secondary.
yes. Mhm. Yeah, and in that plat language in appendix B, it says in parentheses which plat it has to be on. So some are only primary, some are primary and secondary, some are just secondary. So,
And so we have a problem with checking.
yeah, it's an entire appendix. They can basically just copy and paste it if they wanted to. So, all right, so nothing on either of those. Okay. All righty, that's all I have for you this month.
The two we're not going to do.
And temporary signs for residential. Mhm.
Any further discussion? Entertain a motion to approve changes proposed. Right.
We'll approve all of the changes. Proposed changes except the for temporary signs.
Okay, say aye. Opposed?
All right, and then last thing I've got for you, we did have two secondary plats approved since our last meeting. Cold Springs and Hunsinger Farm Section 2 and Arabian Point. So if you would like to review any of those documents, I can put them on the G drive, or I can share you on the folder where I put all of those for next time if that is easier. A lot of technical documents.
So they've been approved and recorded.
Arabian Point was recorded Friday because he posted bonds, but Hunsinger is putting in their infrastructure before they record. So they
The
can't,
county reviews those.
yeah, they do for the auditor to put the parcels in and sign IDs and so you can sell the property. So we'll have our building inspector and then our engineer from Banning go out when Hunsinger is ready to record or wants to record so we can make sure that they have the infrastructure in correctly. So they're good to go.
Do they have the interest?
On 9, they had a small delay in it, but they are back to getting it reopened. So they had to stop construction for a couple weeks. They were into some snags, but they are working on opening it. Should be here soon. Oh, and that pond that they've dug is like a crater. Yeah, they got a lot of water over there that it's gonna fill up probably pretty quick. Is it really? Oh my gosh. I drove by there yesterday and it was bone dry.
We have a lot of dewatering going on.
Yeah, yeah, there's like 40 pumps out there, I think 40 or 46, something like that. Well, or yeah, wells, yeah.
And a water tower. Everybody online, that's common.
I know, it's so boring, all my amendments.
Any other further discussion?
Are you sure there's no one online there?